Elise Loehnen is a writer, editor, and podcast host who lives in Los Angeles with her husband and their 2 sons. She's the host of Pulling the Thread, a podcast focused on pulling apart the stories we tell about who we are and then putting those threads back together. Ultimately, Elise is a seeker and synthesizer, pulling together wisdom, traditions, cultural history, and a deep knowledge of healing modalities to unlock new ways to contextualize who we are and why we're here. While she's also co-written 12 books, including 5 New York Times bestsellers, her first book under her own name is here, and it's called On Our Best Behavior: The 7 Deadly Sins and the Price Women Pay to Be Good. The book weaves together history, memoir, and cultural criticism to explore the ways the patriarchy lands in our bodies and embeds itself in our consciousness, and what we then police in ourselves and in each other. With awareness, we can begin to recognize these patterns of self-restriction, break the story, and move ourselves and each other towards freedom and balance. It is such a pleasure to welcome my friend, the brilliant Elise Loehnen, to the show.
Oh my goodness, Elise. Well, we were talking for a good 20 minutes before this podcast even started because I'm so obsessed with your new book. I mean, I feel, first of all, your new book is called On Our Best Behavior: The 7 Deadly Sins and the Price Women Pay to Be Good. I'm so excited about it. I mean, I love books like this that kind of open my eyes up to an idea that I knew sort of existed, but in the depth and history, and I know it's a very brief history that you acknowledge in the very beginning of the book of the patriarchy, but going through these expectations of women and what hold us back from just our ability to advocate for ourselves and to be explicit with what we need and to not feel guilt and shame when the men in our lives don't ever have to feel those burdens is, whew, I have full body chills over here. Already fired up and out of breath in my 3rd trimester. So let's get into it. Thank you so much for being here. You're such a light and you're brilliant. Like, if anyone isn't following Elise, go follow Elise, because I learned vocabulary terms from you. Like, you're so well read. Your podcast is amazing. I mean, you've co-written 12 books. 5 of them were New York Times bestsellers. You finally wrote your own, and it is just like you dropped a bomb. So thank you for being here. Thank you for putting your heart and soul into it. And I'm so excited about today's podcast.
Thank you, Kelly. That is so kind. And I've loved knowing you for a really long time now and watching you similarly just I know you're pregnant, so you are physically expanding, but just like move more and more into the world. And it's all connected. I mean, that's the thing about the book, but I appreciate the way that you acknowledge women's hunger and help us sort of move into our bodies. Like, it's very hard. Most of us are so disconnected, and that's a big theme of the book.
Yeah, it definitely is. And it's interesting that it goes all the way back to the patriarchy and the history of being controlled when there was a moment in time where we weren't. And so first of all, I want to know, what was your inspiration for writing this book? And then we'll dive in.
So as you said, I've co-written 12 books and never felt, I was just very resistant to the idea of writing my own, or that I would have a book in me. And my agent was like, this is funny. We can keep having this conversation, but you've written a lot of books, so I think you could write another one. And the minute I allowed it, and sort of I could feel a palpable shift in myself where I was like, okay, I would write something under my own name. I've just preferred to sort of stand behind other people. I was like, what is the question? What is the question? And what I really wanted to understand, I opened the book after a session of therapy where I am in my car, pretty distraught, pretty exhausted. And I tend to have this pattern, although it's getting better, I will report, of hyperventilation, where I essentially overbreathe, but my body thinks that I don't have enough oxygen. And so by every afternoon, I'm yawning. I can't take a full breath. It's so exhausting, debilitating, really. And I can do this. I have, in this particular instance, I'd been doing it for 1 or 2 months. And was talking to my therapist and I was like, I just don't understand what it is. I mean, I've done a lot of, my dad's ironically a pulmonologist, right? This is always how it goes. And it's this sort of stew of sleep deprivation, definitely stress, too much caffeine, whatever it is. But I was like, it's the thing in me, this thing in me that is driving me that I can't identify, but it's whatever makes me, I'm a workaholic. I, care about my family, 2 boys, married to a man. Like, I don't know what else I can do to sort of move this away from me and get to a place where I'm feel safe, secure, like I'm enough, like I'm doing enough in all of these parts of my life. Like, how do I calm this down? How do I get to safety? And, we had this whole conversation about giving it an identity, whatever it was that was sitting on my chest helped. And then, I was sitting there sort of exhausted in the car crying and just like, I have to figure this out. Whatever this is that makes me feel unlovable, not good, I need to know what it is. And then I was like, why wouldn't I write about that and use this time to sort of understand what this is? And it really became a question of, why do I think I'm not good? Is this in me, or where is this programming? And I need to, in the same way that we've, identified structures of systemic racism, I was like, what is this systemic misogyny? Like, what is it? What is it in all of us? Because I knew I wasn't alone. I observed the same behavior in my friends, this like constant chasing of goodness, perfection, just trying to stay above any form of criticism, and not in a good way, not in sort of like but in a fear way, in a striving for security way. And so that was sort of the beginning of trying to understand it. And then I pretty quickly started with envy. I was like, is envy the reason that we sort of bat each other down? And I was like, what is envy? And as you said, I love words. So I was like, what's the etymology of envy? And I was like, all right, it's one of those sins. And then I looked at them. I was like, what are those again? And because I wasn't raised in any religious background, but they're sort of they're cultural memes at this point. And I was like, holy bananas. This is a punch card. Sloth, pride, envy, gluttony, greed, lust, anger. And I was like, oh my God, I don't know many men who are policing themselves according to these ideas, but I sure do know a lot of women.
Every single one of us.
Yes.
Just unless you're fully rejecting them and have come into a place to do that, I think it's easy for me to see that envy was the door into these sins, just based on our society right now and the dominance that social media has in so many of our lives, like the comparison that happens, especially as a female entrepreneur who has a presence on social media, like, whoo, like I joke, it's like, it's a blessing and a curse. Like, I love being able to like support women and share things that are empowering, but at the same time, like, I want to throw my phone against a wall.
Yeah. No. And the thing that's, I think, so insidious or pernicious about these ideas is that some of us had, like, you had an overtly Catholic upbringing. So to you, they're palpable and present and you're aware of them. Most of us didn't. And yet, so we don't know what it is. It's buried in our subconscious. And I think that what happens with women is we feel things that we think are unacceptable. We repress and suppress. We're not letting it come up. We're just shoving it down into our bodies. And so envy, it's not even that it's envy that's the most pernicious. It's that undiagnosed envy for women. So I think what we do to each other is something comes up in us that feels uncomfortable. We look at Kelly, we're like, oh, I wish whatever. Like, there's something that you have that we want for ourselves, but we don't even let that come up so we can say, oh, I'm really envious. We just go, we shut it down. And then we're like, I don't like her.
Yeah.
I don't like her. And I found myself doing it where I'm like, what?
Yeah.
But instead of understanding that actually where our attention goes is great information. And certainly there are examples of people in politics or in the public where they're doing harmful things and you are like, I have every reason to not enjoy this person. This isn't good information for me. There's nothing in her that I want. But for most of us in our everyday lives, it's full of information. There's something about you, if you're inspiring envy, or if I feel it in myself, that person is pushing on a dream that I have for myself.
Sure.
Might not be a full dream, but there's something that woman is doing that I want and I want to do. And for whatever reason, I can't allow that wanting, I think just because of our social conditioning. And so I think a lot of it is that. And then we go at each other instead of saying, oh, interesting. I'm going to study you. I want to do this. You're doing this. How can I do this too? It's the Lacy Phillips expanders idea, but most of us are not taught how to do that.
No. And in fact, there's just, like you said, it's just a wall that goes up where you're like, I don't like that person. I'm going to unfollow that person, or I'm not going to engage because it's too painful to. And in reality, it's like just a gaping hole in your life that you want to fill. But for some reason, whether it's your life or restraints, like something's holding you back from that, right?
Yeah.
So what I think is so interesting, we talked about before the podcast started, is that, you know, I did grow up in an overtly Catholic family with good and bad rules of and expectations, you know, one of three girls, where when we got to high school, there was a lot of, there were a lot of rules, you know, and it's funny because it's like this two sides of the coin. Like they kept us good. Like my parents' rules and these expectations, and, you know, like we weren't finding ourselves like being picked up by the cops or, you know, having to go to rehab or anything like that. But at the same time, like it very much was, I think, my parents' fear of raising three girls and the vulnerability of that. And they always tell us, you guys were such good girls. Like we got so lucky. I don't know what we did. We got so lucky, you know, and we listened. But what's interesting is I think it's not necessarily the religious aspect of the seven deadly sins, but it's just that being a good girl has permeated our society. And so I'd love for you to talk about how, you know, in your research for this book, how you believe that started, the history of that, and how it's permeated society.
Yeah. And I'm going to do that. And first, I just want to respond and say what's interesting is I think culturally in this, that we ascribe, you know, even hearing you say that, it's almost like this intimation that you were making is that you would have been an out of control, wild woman were it not for the junk, you know, your parents controlling and confining you. And I think that's another massive amount of piece of cultural programming. And I want to distill that I think it's a whole nother chapter on lust, but like there's a lot of pressure on girls to keep ourselves safe. We don't have to get into that right now. So there is something in that. And yet at the same time, I think girls are told, particularly with any appetite, sexual or around food, that unless we really are controlled and tamp it down, we will be like crazy people in the jail. You know, it's interesting. It's just interesting. I think we're all essentially like good. But this idea that your parents had to sort of be police wardens in order to ensure that is part of it. And it actually goes back to the history. So, and again, this is a massive simplification and we'll never really know. We're learning more and more all the time, but there are no written records from our prehistory. And a lot of it is based on conjectures, although now DNA evidence suggests is creating new breakthroughs all the time. And the real question that all of us have, right, is who am I? Ashley Montague, who's an anthropologist, who always said we should really not be called hunter-gatherers, but gatherer-hunters, because the whole way that we've mythologized how we've gotten food is just another part of our patriarchal culture. But he talked about it as first nature, second nature. First nature is who you really are. Second nature is the stories we tell about ourselves. And so with nature and culture, they're conflated, and it's impossible to tell what's nature. And we talk about sort of biological women, biological men, and who we are. Women are more nurturing and caretaking. Men are more valiant, fierce, and brave. And that informs the size of our bodies. Like, it actually informs who we are, and in really interesting and not amazing ways. And we're finding out all the ways that we've been wrong. So just one small aside, there was a relatively recent discovery in the Andes of these burials for these warriors, and 26 graves, I want to say. And the presumption over time was that they were all male. And then with recent DNA evidence, they've been able to ascertain that 10 of the 26 were women. Women were Vikings. Women were warriors. Like, this whole idea that so many of us were raised on is not accurate. Okay. So the thinking is that throughout our prehistory, and this is different in different parts of the globe. So again, I'm generalizing. But we were partnership-based societies. People like to talk about matriarchy. There's no evidence of a not dominance-based matriarchy. There were matrilineal cultures, and lots of creativity, lots of variance in different communities. But there was never sort of a like women rule, men are property. And when people say they want matriarchy, I'm like, I don't think we want any dominance-based, oppressive gender hierarchies. That's not what we want. So historically, it was affiliative, partnership-based society. You can imagine why. Foraging, hunting, doing life together, surviving.
Yeah. And
in one big site, cattle hike in Turkey, prehistoric, in the Stanford team, like in 2018, 19, they were really starting to relook at this evidence. And men and women, this is fascinating, not true in every culture, but men and women were essentially the same size. They were eating the same diet. So men weren't being favored with more calories. And they had the same amount of soot in their lungs. So they were spending the same amount of time inside. And so you can imagine over time, we bred ourselves for some of this, like women are small and demure and meek, and men are big and strong and patriarchal. It's not always been that way. But then the thinking is that, and actually this was the theory of this UCLA professor, Maria Gimbutas, who was, had discovered she was, did a lot of work around these goddess figurines that were found. There weren't the male equivalent. They don't really know what they were. They could have been revered as sacred objects. They might have been for birthing. But you also think about it and you're like, of course, Mother Earth is typically anthropomorphized as female because women are the creative engines. I think there was a veneration for that ability to create life. It's pretty remarkable. So there were all these goddess figurines that were found, and a lot of feminists went nuts with it. Again, that's where a lot of the matriarchal theories came from. And Gimbutas never really said that, but she did have a theory that this is, again, pre-patriarchy, that she called them kurgans. They came from the Russian steppes. They're called kurgans because of the burial shape of the mounds that they left in their wake, and that they descended on the fertile valley, the cultures that were there. And it was primarily men who came down and essentially created patriarchy, raped, pillaged, enslaved women and children. That was our first evidence of enslaving other people, potentially. I'm sure it was happening in other parts of the world as well. But this is where we practice dominance, learn dominance. And she was, after her death, sort of destroyed by the male establishment and essentially accused of taking her own history as a dispossessed Hungarian woman and trying to put it on history, which is what all men do all the time, just FYI. And then DNA evidence has since proven that she was largely right, that this wave came down and replaced DNA. And then we have sort of these early patriarchal cultures where we have the first laws, Hammurabi's Code, which is so misogynistic. It's like, if a woman cheats, she'll be drowned. Mm-hmm. If a man cheats, he'll be like chided in public. I can't remember the exact, it's just wild. This is women as property, women dispossessed, like women. And became the foundation and our belief that this is how it's always been, and that this is an inevitability is, one of the more pernicious myths that continues to haunt our lives. And patriarchy becomes sort of this boogeyman, right? Like, you're like, isn't my husband? Isn't my boss? Like, a lot of the guys I know are lovely, it's really hard to find. And I think that that's a mistake that we make is sort of like, it's the men. And no, it's a much more complex, insidious system that haunts us all, men included.
Yeah.
And yes, men have benefited, but it is in us all.
It's fascinating to me because it's true. Like you said, like I look at Chris and he's a stay-at-home dad and he's a caregiver and he is connecting over correcting with our kids and like trying to like learn all the parenting hacks, but it's in me to be like, oh, I can't be so big that would make him uncomfortable, or that I can't demand certain things. I need to be easygoing and good. And I need to, and then you talk about appetite and it's like, I can't have an appetite for success. I can't have an appetite for food. I can't have an appetite for sex, and it's like, what?
And you're
like,
still like,
why am I carrying this?
Yeah. And, you're about to have a third child, you have a robust business, and you are, from what I've observed, an exquisite mother. And I'm sure you're still haunted by the specter of like, I'm not doing enough. I'm not doing enough. I could do more in all of these parts of our lives. That's sloth. That's the first chapter. But I'm sure you are denying yourself rest. I'm sure when you are resting, you feel selfish and like you should probably be cleaning out that hall closet. It's very hard to find it. Yeah.
Well, and that's why I think the aha moment for me is that it's societal and passed down, and we're actually allowing this to continue as women because we're maybe unaware. I mean, like I said, it was like, it's like, take that book and slap me in the face with it, at least. Like, just to kind of have that wake up call of, whoa, how is this permeating my life? And how am I allowing for it? And it's just, there've been a few books along the way that have done that for me, where it's like finding my unicorn space, or like understanding that I'm allowed to own pleasure and I'm allowed to own private time and I'm allowed to do things, rest and have these things in my life without feeling guilt. But I don't know why. It's so deeply ingrained that exactly what you said, like, I need to be everything for everyone. And when I do all of that, like, what space is left for me? And it since having children and especially since having children, it's so much easier to balance your life with your personal time and your career goals before you have children. Mm-hmm. But the minute you have these little lives that rely so much on you, and you want to make sure that you're showing up for them in a whole emotional state, and they are just a mirror to like all your traumas and all your, all the burdens you carry as an adult, right? But to then try to quote unquote balance, when all I'm doing is preaching to clients about balance with food and balance, I'm like, am I the biggest hypocrite in the whole world? Like, it's this learning like along the way, and having to relearn and be a constant student. It's very humbling. But this is why I'm like so inspired by being able to do this podcast, read books like yours, is because it does. I mean, it gives you so much more substance and understanding and empathy, and opens my mind to be able to really support the women in my life the way I want to.
Yeah. And it's hard, Kelly, because it's cultural, right? So Chris and I have, my husband has very chill job, and he is a great dad, and he hears about his greatness as a father all the time. No one is giving me trophies. It's just this like constant burnishing of like, oh my God, look at what you showed up. Like, it's amazing that double standard, and not to dismiss what Chris is doing or what Rob is doing, but they're celebrated, even though I know that it takes hits like on the sort of more macho side. I just want to say that it's hard because it's just a given that of course you're going to be there for your kids as a woman, and it's not a given. You know, my kids are in a progressive school. All the volunteers, more or less, probably 85% are women.
Yeah.
And when the text chains start about parties or things, it's the women. It's it's still intense, even in sort of like really progressive parts of our culture. But the other thing is, because it's cultural and systemic, it's really hard to undo it in yourself unless you see other women undoing it as well. And so you mentioned Eve Rodsky's book. It's like, we need these cultural conversations. And I had seen sort of there's Fair Play, there's Overwhelmed, sort of in that sloth. There's a lot of great books about inequity between moms and dads. And there's books about sexuality, but like, I was like, this is actually a system, and we need to talk about all of these things together as one system, and also start talking about these things together in the way that we used to in previous centuries. You know, one of the great harms of the patriarchy, as we move from sort of this affiliative style of living, sharing resources, collective parenting, alloparenting is what it was called, which, understanding sort of the work, this is how it happens in the animal kingdom too. Like, the older adults sort of caretake the younger children all together collectively, while the younger adults can go out and forage and work. And we don't have that, obviously. But women used to sort of do this together. And we have been, within the patriarchy, aligned to a head of family, a pater, and separated from each other. And, and I write about the witch hunts, as particularly in Europe, as this like great, massive gender side that carried over a tiny bit into America, but it's in our consciousness too. In the Salem witch trials, I think 35 people were killed. Well, in Europe, this went on for centuries. It's like 80 to 100,000, primarily women, were hunted, burned, incarcerated, flayed. I mean, it's just insane, actually, when you think about it, the insanity of that, of a gender side like that. But part of that was women turning on other women to protect themselves, turning in their daughters, their mothers, whatever it was. This, like, I think it's still with us, this fear of other women, this like the way that I think we're torn apart and we're not back together. But as we can come together and have those sorts of conversations, I think it's really healing, and compare lives, because I think we're all feeling the same things.
Yeah. I will say, when I think about my mom raising the three of us, when you think about the community of women and the vulnerability that was allowed to happen, it was in such small friendships, like, oh, it's just this one trusted friend and or a neighbor. And it's interesting now, because I mean, when I think about going to baby group, for example, with Sebastian, and having 12 women sit around in a circle with your child, everyone was really vulnerable. It was like, this isn't going well. This is what happened in my birth. This is how I feel like I'm failing. Like, just like that postpartum, bare your soul, non-competitive, like, this isn't my highlight reel. But at the same time, we have like all these connections, and you can have that in specific moments in your life. But then at the same time, there's all of this alienation and comparison happening because of the internet and because of social media. And I think you're exactly right. You think, okay, the 70s, burn your bras, like feminism and like stepping into your own and owning your power. It's like we're saying we want that, but we have all of these things holding us back. We don't even realize it. And we're taking like 2 steps forward and like one large step back, and 2
Yeah.
steps forward and one large step back. So I want to get into the 7 deadly sins that hold us back, and why we're trying to be good. Because I think you're right. Like, we can dissect and put in a silo just our lust, or just, not being envious, or finding, standing up for yourself, and like having personal time, or whatever it is. But the reality is these are permeating together in our striving to be good. So let's go through them one by one, because I think everyone needs to be driving their car going, oh my gosh. Where would you like to start?
Should we just go through we'll start with sloth.
Yeah.
Which the way that we would understand that is laziness, a fear of laziness. I think originally, the thing I just want to say about the sins too, is when I sort of came to this list, I was like, where are they in the Bible? They weren't in the Bible. Okay. So they actually came out of the Egyptian desert in the 4th century, at the same time that the New Testament was being canonized. This monk, Evagrius Ponticus, who was also an early father of the Enneagram, wrote them down as these thoughts, these distracting thoughts, demonic thoughts, but demonic meaning like to pull something that pulls you out of prayer, not fiery furnace demons.
Yeah.
And then it was in 590, centuries later, the Pope Gregory I turned them into the cardinal vices. He dropped the 8th thought, which is sadness, which I included in the book because I think it is lodged in the minds of men, and the fear of feelings and the disallowance of feelings creates toxic masculinity. We can talk about that if we have time. But Pope Gregory, in a single homily, turned them into the cardinal vices and assigned them all to Mary Magdalene, who was mentioned in the New Testament as being the one from whom Jesus cast 7 demons. And in that same homily, he turned her into the woman who anointed Jesus's feet. Different woman. That woman was never identified as a prostitute in the Bible, but Pope Gregory gave her that identity and said she was Mary Magdalene. So that's when Mary Magdalene became a penitent prostitute, instead of the first apostle and the most sanctified person, right? Like, if you subscribe to this, Jesus cleared her, rebalanced her, and yeah. So anyway, okay. So sloth.
We rewrite history all the time.
We rewrite history. Sloth is that programming that tells you, it's what we were just talking about, that you could always be doing more, that rest is selfish, that in every sphere of your life, you should be, it's sort of this Puritan work ethic, this idea that work is a form of salvation. And you're not a good mother, you're not a good coworker unless you're essentially leaving it all there. And even then it's not enough. So it's that impulse that keeps us going when we really should be resting.
Oh, and that one is the hardest, I think, for me, is like, it's permeating everywhere. Like, especially as an entrepreneur, when you're like, and creative things pop into my head. Like, I could do this as a like series to help people pack lunches. I could do this to teach blood sugar for that. And you're like, all of a sudden creating more and more goals for yourself. Or like you said, like you take it into your workouts, or you take it into making food for your family, and you take it into like preparing for holidays for everybody. You take it into everything. And it's
not even could, it's should.
Yeah.
I should. It's that like, I should be doing this. What I'm doing is not enough. It's never enough. I should be doing more.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How do we unravel that? Like, how do we have that moment you had in the car where you're hyperventilating and you're like, how do I make it stop? Like, how do we start making it stop and supporting other women to do the same?
Conversation, dropping balls, putting balls down, and enforce. It's like ironically, because the book is about what we police in ourselves and in each other, but it is a different form of self-policing. It's watching our language and watching that instinct and saying, it's okay. It's like a redirection of self-love, and it is putting balls down so that other people, partners, ideally, pick them up. And it's interesting, even in my own relationship, it doesn't happen as much as I would like, but there are times when I'm like, I don't really want to make dinner. Rob, can you make dinner? And in there's this vacuum of things that I think I rush in to fill. I'm very competent. It creates so much learned helplessness in our lives, right? Like, why would anyone step up when I'm just going to take over? I'm going to do it. It's easier for me to do it than to ask my husband to do it. But I think in order to shift it, we actually have to restrain ourselves and stop ourselves and get incredibly crystal clear about sort of the parameters of what we want to do and what we don't, and keeping things simple, which is really difficult in a time of complexity. And then I think for women, it's talking to each other, because there's so much shame for women who work outside of the home, women who work inside the home, the way that we culturally devalue the other.
Yeah.
And no men are sort of like, I should be home. I mean, maybe a few, but it's not, there's no cultural sort of idea that if a man is at a board meeting out of state, that he's being a neglectful parent. Whereas we still hold that judgment against women. So in this one, I think it's really about stopping ourselves and just saying, it's okay if the house is not perfectly clean. Part of it is hard because, like, you might have that preference. I have that preference.
Yeah.
But some of it is actually stopping and saying, I can't do this. I'm going to bed at 8. Put the kids to bed.
Yeah.
You know? Really hard though.
Well, it is interesting. I think the most stressed out I've been is the end of last year when we were finishing the remodel of our house. And it was like, I had my entrepreneurial life and my business that I was building, and products and podcasts and all the things, clients. And then it was like the mom job, which is also 24/7 and not stopping. And then it was like, then all of a sudden we like had this house that, that I worked to purchase for our family, and then was working to make, like,
maintain it,
clean and livable for our family so we could move in. And it was like making so many decisions, and then the financial burden of all of that on top of it, where you're kind of like, I'm stretching myself to buy a house. Okay, I did it. And now I'm like putting the floors in and repainting and everything. And you're like hyperventilating. And it was super freeing for me. It's sad that it had to take going to that, like I want to say, like, rock bottom financial stress to say, just cross things off the list. Like, no, we're not going to do the pool. Cross it off. No, we're not going to go on that vacation. Cross it off. No, we're not going to sign up for that camp right now. Cross it off. And just being like, I'm making these decisions. So I'm like, with unwavering, like just clearing things from my calendar, saying I'm not doing things. And it was like this absolute need to minimize what I was requiring of myself, and these jobs and the time and the stress and everything. And it was like the only time I've really done that. Every other time in my life, I'm like, yeah, sure, I can do that. Yes, I'm never saying no, and I feel like it's taken me 10 years in my career to have boundaries around, like, I actually don't have time for that. No, I can't. I know that you want to be on the calendar, but like, I'm going on a maternity leave. I have 6 weeks left and I'm closing up with clients right now. Like, and sometimes people are pushy and they ask for things and you're like, oh, okay, yeah, like I'll fit you in. And it's like, no, like, holding those boundaries, I've noticed for me, it's in certain aspects of my life where I've been doing it long enough, like in my career, I am getting better and better at it. But in the mom life or the, other parts of life, it's so difficult until it's like your house is on fire.
Yeah. Well, I think what you're talking about, it applies across the board to almost every sense. Certainly greed. This is a big part. We live in a culture of more in all parts of our lives. Always more we could be doing, always more we could be buying, etc. And most of us I put myself in this camp, have never actually sat down and taken 10 minutes, 20 minutes, an hour, maybe an hour a year, 10 minutes a quarter to articulate what it is that we need and what is that we want. And I was having this conversation. I was no longer at my full-time job working on this book. Like you, I'm the primary breadwinner. And I was full of panic and anxiety. And I was talking to this sort of spiritual teacher I work with, and I was like, I don't have enough. I don't have enough. And she was like, all right, what do you need? And what do you want? And I was like, I don't really know. And she was like, well, let's start there. Like,
yeah,
she talks about the divine, like it doesn't actually really matter. Universe. She's like very good at serving needs, but what people don't actually articulate them, figure out what they are, and make a list, make an Excel document. And there is something, as I'm sure you found, and this has been a great reassurance for me, where as I write it down, I'm like, there's not that much that I need. There's actually very little that I want that I don't have. I want or need to pay my mortgage, have a safe house, educate my kids, pay Vicky, who has been with our family since Max was born, as much as I can, pay for her health insurance and her husband's health insurance, go home to Montana once, twice a year. It's actually, I'm like, I don't want a lot, actually.
yeah.
2 functioning cars. And when you actually start to write it down, and I think you can do this again, like what you want for your kids, what does healthy relationship look like? You're like, actually, I can do this. It's this specter of like more, not enough, that is killing us, definitely killing our planet. And you can't get your arms around it because you can't define it. But like you, when you're like, I don't really need a pool, I don't know that we would actually use that. I don't need a second home. I don't need an extra bedroom that will just collect tumbleweed. It's, I think, an opportunity for us all to get our arms around it and say, okay, this is enough. This I can do. There's something in my mind that's concrete. And it just takes the fangs out of it. It becomes less scary.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's also part of it, Kelly, is like a few of those indulgences and being like, how do I actually give myself some things that I want, which might for me is time, space, stillness, quiet.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting where we indulge. Like when I think about me personally, I don't know if I started to identify as a minimalist or someone who is like anti-fashion, but like people will be like, where'd you get that sweatshirt? And I'm like, Ron Herman, 6 years ago. So sorry. Yes. Like, and I'm like proud of that. I'm so like, when people DM me about like an outfit I'm wearing and it's like from 5 years ago, and I've like worn it at multiple events, I'm like, it's like a badge of honor. And I know that that's sort of backwards too, because I definitely spend in areas of health. It's like where I am like, I want the infrared sauna. Like I want the lymphatic drainage massage. Like sign me up for that, like herbal supplement that's like gonna like detox my liver, whatever it is. Like, so we can't judge someone who's like, I want the Chanel bag, but in the same way, I'm like, I want this, And so I do feel like in this stage in my life, the freedom of like, hey, I'm gonna be 40 in July. I'm like, this is what I want. I don't feel like I have to have a specific outfit on to be who I am. But if I'm not doing the health things, I do feel like, wow, I feel the pressure to like, do I need to buy a cold plunge, Elise? Like,
I'm not a cold plunger.
I know. I can't even get in a cold shower. I'm like 2 minutes. I'm like 30 seconds, maybe. So sauna all day long. I'm a lizard. Put me in the desert. But in the book for greed, you talk
Yeah.
about how, some women are underpaid and they're ashamed to ask for more money.
Yeah.
So it's not just about like the guilt of greed, but it's actually like knowing your worth.
Yes. It's knowing your worth and understanding the difference between your worth, which is and sort of an unquantifiable number, and your value in the market.
Yeah.
And theoretically aligning those two, but also understanding how messed up our society is, and that the value that we put on different functions and jobs certainly does not align with their worth. So we don't pay. I mean, if you think about the GDP of all of the people who stay home to take care of children so that other people can be drivers of the economy, and we say that that is worth zero, our whole capitalist market is weird. It's not necessarily aligned. And as we're seeing in late stage capital, it's like, whoa, we're very close to there being only extremely wealthy people and poor people. So, but yes, we hear a lot about the, wage gap, and that primarily affects mothers, women of color. The massive discrepancies are because of these care jobs, which are primarily filled by women and women of color, and white women who are single typically earn equivalents with their male partners, or male equivalents at work. There is discrepancy, like male nurses make more than female nurses, et cetera, which is just, even though there are very few male nurses. So there's a lot of that pernicious programming, but it's bigger than that. The wealth gap between men and women is staggering. It's 32 cents to $1, because this is like generational accrual. And the reality is women are better investors than men too. That's what all the data suggests. So, but we're sort of this increasing lag between the two compounds over time, and is a problem. And I talk a lot about the work of Lynn Twist, and she talks about who wrote The Soul of Money. And women tend to see money as more finite, not limitless. And I think it's because we are so connected to the cycles of the planet, and we're so connected to our bodies in a deeper way, where we're like, it isn't infinite. This isn't just like up and to the right, this like ongoing growth that we're so used to. This actually has a cost. There is an energy, there's a current associated with money. Whereas men see it as a river, women see it more as a pond. And so, as you were saying, it's like when we go out and negotiate, we're actually excellent negotiators on behalf of other people. Better negotiators. We're not good negotiators when it comes to ourselves. The reasons are probably very clear to people as to why.
Yeah.
And I was at a dinner the other night with some Hollywood people, and they were just talking about like getting pitched by maybe directors, and the women will just be amazing. And then the man is like blustery and doesn't have much experience, but is full of confidence. And the woman will like pull herself out, even though her pitch was so much better and she's so much more qualified, because she doesn't feel ready at this point in her career to take on this project. And I think so many of us can relate to that. Like, if I can't do it perfectly, then I shouldn't do it. And it stops us from trying. And part of that is like, I don't want to be the one that messes this up for other women, right? Because scarcity permeates our whole culture. Not only are thinking about money, and for many women, money is scarce, but in opportunities, in seats at the table, it is this like, they all, as I said, it's a system. They all crash into each other, right? But there's like, now that they call it toucanism, where there might be 2 women on a board or 2 women on an executive team. But it's not just tokenism anymore, Kelly, but that there's still so much scarcity that the only way we can imagine getting into that room is by dethroning someone else.
Right. And then it's back to the competition, and also that currency that you're talking about.
Yeah.
That the energy that it takes to do something like that, where in a female, you're also comparing that to how much time and energy you should be putting towards your kids, your marriage, your home, whatever it is, and going like, do I have the time to allocate to that, where that may not even be weighed in a man's mind when it comes to being asked to join a board, or being asked to like come speak at a conference, or take even an advancement in their career at the same company. Like, I have multiple friends who, when they had young children and, are in the stage that I'm in right now, have had director roles and been looked at, in their early 40s, like, you're going to be tapped as potential one of those two women in the VP line. And they're like, I want this, but I don't want it right now. And that's okay to say, but it's also like, there's no man that I know that wouldn't be like, heck yeah, let's do it. Because you're thinking about all the other things that they're going to need to sacrifice, and how they're going to need to really like cut up their own little pie of energy and time for all the other things and expectations that the world has on them.
Yeah. And performing perfectly in a way that I just don't think that men at all are concerned about performing their jobs perfectly and being everything for everyone. And like, can I be the best VP? If I can't be the best VP at this moment in time, then don't bet on me, right? We hold ourselves back and self-restrict. And I completely understand. And we can't do that anymore.
Yeah.
Our good enough, I'm kind of convinced, is a man's excellent. But we're holding ourselves to this standard of excellence that nobody is achieving outside of us.
Right.
And it's not to sort of, it's not to dog men either. It's just, they're not programmed in the same way. There's no one telling them like, you're taking something from someone else. If you don't do this right or do this perfectly, you'll be judged. Your kids will suffer. It's just not in their minds. They're not programmed. And I would say like, oh, be more like men. That's not the antidote either. I think that we're seeing that a lot, where it's like, let's just sanitize all these, companies or this culture with femininity. And yes, we need balance. We need proper representation, of course, but that's not enough.
Right.
It's not enough because it's in us. So it's like, how do we actually, and for men, and Chris is a good example of this. For men, it's letting their feminine come up. And for women, it's like rest. I think we're all pretty balanced, actually, much more balanced as women, where we understand that we have masculine energy too. Like, that's the energy where we're directing, we're conducting the trains, we're making sure everything happens. Mm-hmm. And the feminine energy being sort of the caring, nurturing, creativity, again, not assigned to gender. I think this is sort of a moment that we're having in culture where we're starting to understand that these are actually not gender idea. They're not gendered. They're actually just qualities that are in each of us. And so we need more men like Chris, who is obviously very comfortable in his masculine and very comfortable in his feminine. Mm-hmm. So you start to see a world, or imagine a world, of Chris's and Kelly's.
Yeah.
And Rob's and Elise's. Rob's also comfortable in his feminine, but like isn't as hardworking as I am, I'll say it. But he's more slothful. But that's also what has to happen. Men have to men need to be coached in their feminine, because I think that it's present. It's like they are caring, nurturing. This is not the sole mandate of women. This is not our job.
Right.
Part of our job, half of our job, but we're also have the other as well.
Yeah. And you see it in whatever your role is, like even, what I think people immediately associate that with like a working professional, or like the breadwinner of a family being the female. But I see it with all of my close friends who are stay-at-home moms. I mean, they are like running a tight ship. Yes. Like, it is like Thrive box deliveries are coming, and they have everything on the calendar, and their house would fall apart. Like, they worry just as much as I do when we're going to a 40th birthday and it's like an overnight somewhere. Like, is everything going to be okay when I'm gone? Because they're running it like a business and have so much control of that house, and that's their masculine energy coming through. They're directing, they're like maintaining their, yeah, and it's such an important role, so so interesting. So what I think is also what comes up for me when we start to talk about that is like pride, like and just like being proud of our accomplishments and not pushing ourselves down or pretending like it's no big deal or brushing it off and trying to move on to the next goal.
Yeah. Pride's a tough one because, and it crashes in, you see how they start to crash in. So pride is what keeps us small. Fear of pride, fear of seeming prideful, narcissistic, like we feel like we deserve things. It's this, that we dare to be seen.
Yeah.
And it's a very, very scary to be seen, in part because you inspire undiagnosed envy, and you invite a tremendous amount of censure socially. And we might think that we're beyond that. We are so far from being beyond that. And you see it everywhere. This is the chapter I write primarily about our most visible seen women, famous ones. And we could say, oh, it's like watching them sort of like, it's a very typical trajectory. We all recognize it. They sort of emerge out of nowhere. We're excited. We love them. And then they hit sort of a certain cultural point, and then we shoot them down. We gun them out of the sky. It's like the flight of Icarus. And we just like all women too relish sort of the fodder of watching them fall. And then sometimes we like their comeback. Sometimes it's posthumous, like Princess Di or Billie Holiday, or, there are a lot of cultural examples, Britney Spears. Yeah. But that trajectory, I think, is very familiar and part of our cultural landscape and part of our cultural entertainment. And I think there's some schadenfreude that many of us feel when we watch Martha Stewart go to jail or whatever it is. And it feels good because it is part of that sort of envy cycle where we're like, oh, she's put back in her place. She got what she deserves, whatever it may be. The problem, besides the fact that it's pernicious, and the problem with this is that what it is programming into all women, all young women, is this is what will happen to you if you are seen. If you dare to step out of the confines of your house or your small little career, if you dare to have a dream for yourself and make that dream known, and you don't manage it perfectly, you will be destroyed. And we see examples of this everywhere. When I was looking for examples of women who have endured without getting destroyed, it's actresses, it's people like Meryl Streep, beautiful woman, not like threateningly pretty. She's sort of unique, striking, brilliant, quiet, kind, comes out, does a movie, does her sort of small promotional moment for it, wins her Oscar, goes away. Yeah. Like, there is nothing about Meryl that's like, look at me, or she has managed her career, I would say, exquisitely for self-preservation. But I would have to imagine that there's more of her, not that she has to share herself with the world more, but who knows? I just think maybe she doesn't, I don't know. It's just, it has to be a process of like self-protection, unfortunately, rather than full expression.
Oh, it's like you're cutting me right open, because I'm sure like Meryl Streep is the perfect example of someone who has managed her career appropriately and not been big, but not made anybody too envious or uncomfortable with her success. And that pullback time after like a blip up, the like slight pullback and plateau that she has before her next big rise is made people comfortable with her success over time. And they look at her, and her career is just phenomenal. Right. Yeah. And then you look at I mean, I'm not as great with actresses, but thinking of like an actress that is just like skyrocketed, or you can.
Anne Hathaway. That's who I opened the chapter with.
That's right.
She wins her Oscar and she whispers to her, like, oh, it came true. Like, she acknowledges in the moment that she had this dream for herself. She had been sort of loved. Then there was this growing amount of dissent. They were called Hatha-haters. And part of it was the juxtaposition with Jennifer Lawrence. And she was on her way up. I mean, she was sort of like bumbling, tripping, falling, laughing at herself. And it's like watching herself deprecate was very soothing to
Everyone's
America.
comfortable with that.
Everyone's comfortable. I'll make fun of myself so you don't have to make fun of me. Like, don't look at me. I don't think I'm worthy. I mean, I don't know exactly what's going through Jennifer. She's very charming, but it's like, that's what we like. Meanwhile, Anne Hathaway collected, like Anne Hathaway daring to have a dream for herself. And then she was just destroyed viciously.
Yeah.
Viciously. And it's like, even, I mean, I write about this at length, but even watching, it's like the Oscars that she co-hosted with James Franco, and he was high and completely, I mean, and he
babbling idiot.
We're like, babbling idiot. And people were like, he's charming. She's annoying.
Yeah.
Like, she's on trying to host an award show with a completely obliterated co-host.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah. Well, there's a fear of the fall. There's always a fear of the fall. And what's so interesting is I'd be curious about your career, like looking back on my career, I felt completely fearless when I started. Like, people are like, oh, Kelly's little new hobby, she's sharing recipes and blood sugar tips on Instagram. Look at that, And I was just like, cool, this is really fun. I want to inspire people. I want to keep sharing. Like, I had all the freedom in the world, like 200 followers, all my friends from high school and college, like no trolls, like nothing. And then you go out with your first book and it's exciting and it's fun and you have people supporting you, and they're like, oh my gosh, like, this is amazing. Congratulations. You're on your way up or whatever. And then, then you're like, okay, what's next? How do I keep reaching more people? How do I keep building? But then you build this community that then all of a sudden there's fear instead of freedom around what is next. Because like what you said, it's like, I have to show up perfectly. It has to be bigger than the last. It has to not not make anyone uncomfortable so that they have a reason to hate me. But it's like, then you're just filtering and you're not really being your authentic self. But then also you layer on what's happening in the world and wanting to know as much as you can so that you can have a well-formed opinion and say something profound. And in certain times in your life, you're like, I don't even have the time to know myself right now because I'm running all over the place trying not to be a sloth.
Yeah.
And I'm also expected to know everything about everything culturally so that I can show up on my platform and have an opinion about it, when I don't want to have like an immature or uneducated opinion about something. So I'm just going to hold back because this could be something that could make me fall from grace. And I got to stay in my lane.
Yeah. I mean, that's like that part is a whole 3-hour conversation. This expectation that we have of people to know complex situations in depth, which then, and I completely understand the instinct. And then at the same time, I'm like, this is part of the problem, right? Like, we need to be listening to, I want to hear about these issues on NPR with their reporting acumen and skill for translating complexity and nuance at their back. Like, I don't know enough. I am not an expert. But the sort of pressure that you get to sort of say something, and that if you don't say something, you're somehow complicit I think we have to sort of work on that culturally. And part of it, I think, is just the restraint, because so much of it is highly performative. And that's what I try and watch in myself. Am I talking about this issue because I actually have something to share or say that's helpful? Or am I doing it in a reflexive, self-protective, performative way? Have I actually personally made a donation or of time, money, et cetera, and spoken to people? Or am I just reflexively doing something so that people can't tell me I haven't done something? It's very intense out there. And that's become my process of just like, run this through my body, calm down. And as you said, knowing my lane, which sounds self-restricting, but I think actually we each have our own purpose in this life, or the things where we're supposed to make contributions, and that's your job. And part of our culture, the pernicious programming of this rugged individualism, is that we're all supposed to be everything to everyone. And it's like, no, actually, this is like, we live in a complex society that's dependent on everyone bringing their gifts. And we are not all good at the same things. We're not all supposed to be good at the same things. And so instead of running around and pretending to be, I am actually going to just say, this is what I can do. I'm good at words. I'm good at, whatever your thing is.
Yeah.
And I'm going to do this, and then I'm going to support other people who are good at other things rather than rushing to fill that space. So that's a really complex part. And then I think with career, for me, again, it goes back to that spreadsheet and clarity. And Krissa, the woman I was talking about, who's one of my spiritual teachers, early on, she didn't say this just to me. She said this to a group, but it's like the rule I live by. Your vibration must be higher than what you create. Otherwise, you cannot manage it. And we see this all over the place. People who are like, I'll do this, I'll do this, I'll do this. And then they are run over by the fact that they cannot manage it. And they're creating something that's outside of their, it's just very easy, as you know, to get sucked in where you're like, oh, the quality will just be worse. It's just not who you are. It's not who I am. Yeah. So I think about that probably daily. Of if I'm going to write a book, I'm going to spend 3 years writing this book, and then limiting what I do in order to keep myself sane. So I don't really consult. I want to write books. I want to host a podcast. That's kind of it. I do a couple of boards, and which is really fun and sort of keeps me connected a tiny bit to business. But if I can make that work, that's the dream I have for myself. And maybe that sounds ambitious to some or modest to others, but that's my dream. And I'm willing to sort of, well, hopefully my book resonates and does well, but like I would move out of, I live in an expensive city. We would move. Like, I don't want to, as you said, chase something grand so that I am completely over my skis and panicked. Mm-hmm. And I don't want to be, for a time in my life, it's like I had a full-time job, an intense full-time job, and I was ghostwriting books. And, I needed to do all of that to support my family and keep all these feelings of like, I don't have safety and security at bay. Yeah. And I just can't do that anymore. And I don't know. And what I found, and this is my woo-woo self, but in articulating this vision for myself and actually really feeling like I'm doing my dharma, like this is what I'm supposed to be doing. I'm living it, and I'm staying within my integrity, that the universe has helped considerably. Like, just small sort of windfall, literally, where I'm like, oh my God, I forgot that I had a little bit of equity in that company and it just sold. Like small things, nothing massive, but where I'm like, I wasn't expecting this money, and enough where I'm like, oh my God, this is working somehow. And it's not all dependent on me, like ghostwriting 3 books a year.
Right.
It's been an interesting co-creative ride, but my part has been the clarity. And it sounds like you are in that process too. This is what I need. I don't need this. This would feel good.
Uh-huh.
And I think about like, I love writing a newsletter, for example. I'm like, this feels fun, not destructive to me. But I'm not going to go do another startup,
Yeah.
you know? I don't want to go take a corporate job.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Well, I think what's so interesting is that I don't know if it's time in your career or, for a lot of people going through the pandemic and really questioning everything and having a pause to say, like, what is it that I need? What is it that I want? Who am I? Like, how do I want to show up in the world, and what is enough? And just having the space, and then also having the confidence to say, like, I'm going to try this. Like, there's nothing wrong with trying this. To have the world show up the way it has for you, and to have what you're putting out into the world be so transformative for your listeners to your podcast and the readers. I mean, I can't vouch for this book enough. Like, I want to touch on gluttony and lust before we close up today, just because I think it's an important topic, being that I'm a nutritionist and a health coach and body-based. So, like, you can't feel sexy in your body, and also you can't have pizza,
Yeah, I know.
But your husband can eat a whole box of pizza in your bed at 10 o'clock at night, and it's not a big deal.
My husband eats a pint of ice cream every night without fail, because he leaves the spoon and the plastic, on the coffee table. I'm like, I know what you're doing. And you weigh, he might weigh less than I do. I'm not sure. I stopped weighing myself. But
yeah, that's good. But I mean, like, that's the thing, is I'm really proud of you. And I look at you as like a mentor of someone who's really in alignment. And I think what's so interesting is, in your past life, when you had so many access to so many experts and so many different people, and you've written so many books, and you can be pulled in so many different directions and be excited about so many different things. It's almost more work to have to say, like, when you're getting these opportunities, no, like, that isn't what makes me happy. And actually, just these 2 things, or 3 things: hosting my podcast, writing my book, writing my newsletter. These are the things, and they aren't selfish. It isn't selfish for me to build my own business and to be my own platform and to do the things that light me up and bring me joy. Whereas, like, no man would ever be like, well, I need to help this person build their business, and this person write their book, and this person get their newsletter subscribers up. Like, like, there was a time for me for so long where it was like, be on this panel or do this thing. I said yes to everything. And I think that's normal in the beginning of anyone's career. Yeah. But then at a certain point you go, no, like, I've been building this brand forever, and I'm watching people, build their own brands. And then there's that, undiagnosed envy of, like, well, how did they do that? They have like a subscription service and 1 million followers and like a best-selling podcast. And like, I just never, why am I not doing that for myself? And it's just to not be selfish, to not be prideful, to not want or be greedy, or to be greedy with your time. And it's not, like, you're undoing that, and you're an example of that. And
thank you. And I think part of it is this, like, and we've certainly seen this in wellness. It's these things that are so sort of emerged out of the feminine, and then become capitalized on, like, the patriarchy moves in, like, intensely, and I see this, we don't have to take a right turn into sort of like the bros who have just, like, taken over the space. And I have sort of an actual, like, I wish you well. And, like, that's not who I am. That's not what I'm trying to do. There's part of it that's like, And I think it's part of your mission too, as we can move to gluttony, of like getting us all back into our bodies. What am I hungry for? Like, what does food even taste like? Because so many of us are so, I think, at least I was completely disconnected from food, nourishing, understanding what I want, and feeling, and the constant moralizing of, oh, I was bad yesterday. I was bad yesterday. I have to be good today. I have to be good today. And again, going even to the beginning of the conversation where you were describing your mom as being like, whether you would be good without her telling you not to. I think so many of us think about our bodies as these like runaway appetites, and like, better lock her down, lock that part of her down before she like eats the whole fridge. It's this like, spectrum of permitting and restricting where we think we're out of control. Always. Yeah. It's like our first inclination.
Well, you need like a diet or rules or something to follow, or you're not and I will say, like, the success of the Fab Four with so many of my clients is that it is, and I'm like totally open with this, is it's light structure safety, right? Yeah. It's like, this is just a short list of things to add to your plate. I'm not telling you can never have a brownie or wine. I'm telling you, I just want you to put these 4 things on your plate, and whatever it is that you want under those categories. And it's very general, but just follow this. It feels like, okay, I'm not giving you a PDF list of what you can and cannot eat. So it's not this major rebound or a pendulum ball back to like, open the fridge, open the pantry, eat everything and try again tomorrow. Right. Yeah. And that has been a sweet spot of success, but also just like under all of that is exactly what you're talking about in the book, is like, well, why would anyone even need the Fab Four? Why don't they feel safe or trust their body enough to be like, I'm not going to be a runaway glutton if I just buy the things that I feel like, or can really tune into what I want. And it's nuanced because there's some blood sugar biology to that, blood sugar stuff to that. There's some dopamine and neurotransmitter stuff related to that. And it's like, whew, you can start to like real traumas related to that, and like self-soothing. There's like all kinds of layers and layers and layers here, but it does unearth those feelings of like, why do I think I'm so out of control without rules?
Right. And I think for us, again, this like understandable identity with the planet and with the world, I think we feel all of that in our bodies. And I think that then our bodies also, and this is a very reasonable instinct, we're trying to solve everything that we see in our world, in ourselves. And, we recognize that our food system is really problematic and was structured. I always think people assign all this malevolent intent where it should not be assigned. Yes, the Sacklers are terrible, have done terrible things to us socially. I'm not saying, and insulin prices, et cetera, but there's this like, big pharma, and I'm like, well, I really need my migraine medicine, and my son needs his rescue inhaler. And like, I'm very grateful for pharma, and similarly with food, I don't think that there's like evil intent. I think that our food system was structured, and that the label came out at a time when there was a tremendous amount of food and calorie insecurity. There was the idea of this like, oh my God, there are nutrient deficient diseases that were being identified. This is when all of this was happening. And so they structured a label out of fear of famine after World War I or II. And they haven't evolved it or updated it since. And at the time there was like all calories are the same, and we need to get nutrient dense, highly caloric food distributed all over the globe. And we have known so much more. And yet our food system and I think at Tufts, I think that the School of Nutrition there, like there's a lot of work, I think internal work at the government trying to like reimagine our food system using food as pharma also. But I think we hear that. We know that we're poisoning our environment and that that's showing up in our bodies in ways that I honestly think are outside of our ability to control or solve. But our instinct, of course, is like, well, how do I keep myself safe in this very unsafe world? It's a very understandable instinct, but I think it becomes, because I can't fix that, I'll just fix myself. And it doesn't
impossible.
work like that. Yeah, it's impossible. And it creates, I think, a compounds the fear that many of us have of not only am I out of control, but the world is out of control. And this is the only thing that will keep me from death. I mean, who knows? I think it can come to that in people's minds. Yeah.
Oh my goodness. And to even want on top of that is like a sin.
Yeah. And it's a sin.
Yeah. So, I mean, when you look at gluttony and then you bring in lust, I mean, these are generally things that are totally acceptable for men.
Yep.
And just really demonized in women.
Demonized. Pleasure. Yeah. It's this, and lust is so, it's devastating because, and that was definitely the hardest chapter for me to write, because I think most women, vast majority, maybe all women, have had some sexual trauma in their lives. This is just a understandable gauntlet that we are all subjected to. And the programming is really perverse because, and it wasn't, again, it's not in the Bible. This is all Augustine stuff. This is all 4th century. He's the one who created original sin and made it about lust and Eve. And it's really interesting how these stories evolve over time. But with lust, which is like our most primary creative force, it is how we food and pleasure. This is how we contact and enjoy the world. And when women, and I think we all are, cut off from our lust in an early time, not only do we lose that experience, that sensual embodied experience that feels good, but we're also told that it is our responsibility to keep ourselves safe, because boys will be boys, Kelly. Men can't be trusted. You can't expect them to control their rapacious appetites. It is your job as the more responsible gender to keep your body safe, and your body is a distraction. Your body is, again, it's like this attention is dangerous. If you express it, you are asking for it. And it's like, I think of the 1,000 sexual assaults that are reported, only 25 are ever pursued. It's like a staggering statistic. And it's this, like, our sexuality is a loaded gun against ourselves. And guess what, Kelly? If you inspire someone to do something to you sexually, and then you would expect any semblance of justice, you're ruining his life.
Yeah.
Well,
and I think the hardest part is, seeing the shame and guilt and self-blame that happens after any type of assault or trauma to a young woman at any stage in life, from high school, college, early career, whatever it is, that was impacting moments that can sit with you forever and make you feel tarnished or damaged or unlovable. And then there's no responsibility placed on that person. It's all self, you internalize it as your problem, because like you said, maybe you dressed too provocatively, or you were flirting too much, or you were, God forbid, you're in a turtleneck and sweats, but you're, born very attractive. To that person, it's like, it's so heavy, because it's exactly what you say. It's like, you're not allowed to want this. You're not allowed to dress like you want this. You're not allowed to be explicit that you want this. And if anything happens, it's your fault.
Yeah. Regardless, it's your fault.
Yeah.
And it is so pernicious. Even like anyone who has had something happen, when you think about the women who are reporting this and what happens to them, and the way that they are accused, I think it was like in Philadelphia, they used to call it the lying bitch unit.
Wow.
And research suggests that people lie about this stuff. Women lie about sexual assault at the rate that they lie about other crimes, which is essentially not at all.
Mm-hmm.
And you think about that, you think about the programming, and then compounding that to have to go and tell someone about it and talk about it. And then people think that you wanted to invite this scrutiny.
I know.
It's so perverse, and it's a really vicious cycle. And this one's a hard cultural one, because you see how girls now dress, and I think my generation, I'm like, oh my God, like,
Yeah.
keep yourself safe. And they're like, don't body shame me, and screw you, patriarchy.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I respect that. And I also am like, culture is not there, guys. Like,
Yeah.
be careful. It's not like, please be careful, because we're not there.
Mostly you're just trying to protect the aftermath of what could happen for them, and those feelings and how they may manifest in their life after the fact as
Yeah.
being unlovable, or feeling like they have, and like a scarlet letter, or like something wrong with them that's their fault. Like, yeah, I mean that,
Yeah.
then there's the disconnect, right? It's like,
Yeah.
you don't want them not to be, you don't want to make them feel like you're body shaming them. You're not, but you also,
Yeah.
in the same breath, are saying you're just, the culture isn't there, and I don't want for you what so many women of our
Yeah.
generation have to carry into their
Yes.
adulthood.
Exactly. And there's a distinction too, where particularly in our sex phobic culture, where we don't teach, like the Danes, I think, teach responsibility and joy. And
Yeah.
we teach, erections and STDs,
Yeah.
and unwanted pregnancy. But you see it, there's this distinction. Peggy Orenstein talks about this, like a girl who said to her, my boyfriend says I'm sexy, but not sexual. And I think that's the other really important distinction, is that I think that those things are not the same. And for women, it's like, you can be sexy, you can be sort of performing it, but not actually be in your body and not be sexual. And I think you can be highly sexual and not sexy, but the external manifestation, the way that that's projected as like, there's something about that too, that I think for young girls, I'm like, it's very sexy, but are you sexual? Like, are you in touch with what you want? Like, do you know what pleasure feels like? Do you know how to have a conversation with your partner or boyfriend? And it's sort of this like conflation of the two, playing with sexiness without the sexuality. And I think that's what I was missing from my life, was like, from early trauma, just being cut off from my own sexuality. That's like such a crime,
I mean,
and
and it's just going to keep going. Like, think
yeah,
about all these young children, like high school age, that get access to phones, and then they have access to Instagram and, porn sites and all of these things. And they now have a vision of what being sexual looks like for a woman, but it can
yeah,
be completely performative. And then there's this expectation of like what that looks like, not what it may be animalistically, or like what you really need, and what, like, to feel comfortable looking what the world might think is crazy or something,
yeah,
in an orgasmic state, for example. And you're like, there's no, you're just enslaved again in your own
yeah,
to being sexy versus having a sexual experience, which then disconnects you from your partner. And then we see, divorce rates and disconnection and women feeling unhappy, and
yeah,
it's just this cycle.
yeah, yes.
So heavy.
It's really heavy.
Your book could have been like a Britannica encyclopedia.
We didn't even talk about anger, but it makes me angry. That's the finale. But yeah, and all of our fear of externalizing our anger turned inward, and it makes us sick. It's just making us.
You're not allowed to be angry, Elise. Stop being angry about it. This is just the way it is. You just push that down and write a very sweet email that has explanation points and emojis, so people don't think you're being a bitch.
I
was hoping. And if you don't mind.
Yes.
I'm thinking that maybe this isn't working.
You've probably thought of this already. I hope I'm not bothering you.
Thanks so much for your understanding. Oh my God, Elise, I love you so much.
Kelly.
You needed to write this book. And guys, I apologize. We touched the surface. This could have been a 3-hour podcast. I already took you way longer than I should have. And I'm just so proud of you. I'm so excited about it.
Thank you.
It's a heavy one in a good way, because I would say book club this one with your girlfriends and do like a chapter, and then you need 2 weeks to talk about it, and then do another chapter and see how it's coming up in your life, because it can be therapy when people really start to dive in. It really is. Wow. I mean, yeah, I feel like you could put like a PhD, MD behind this name of yours. You're so, you've always loved vocabulary. You've always loved words. You're so well read. You're so well educated. I think you are curious about all of this stuff, which really shows up in the book. And I've always known that, but to see it in written form, I hope you're really proud of yourself. Right now, I hope you're just so dang proud. So own that.
Thank you. I worked. Yeah. I don't think I could have made it any better. I'm so grateful to my editor, because she worked me really hard and to good end. And I hope people do book club it. I mean, that is what my greatest hope for this book is, that it just passes from woman to woman, and that it's something that we start talking about and identifying with each other's support, so that we can get it out of
Jenna,
our bodies.
Hoda, hey, ladies,
from your lips.
I got your next book. I'm going to see 5 stickers on this at Target in 5 weeks. It's going to be great. I can't wait for you.
Oh, thank you so much. You're the best.
Elise, where can people follow along? Where can they snap the book? When does it come out?
It's out on May 23rd and available wherever you get your books, also on audio, also in the UK, Australia, at the same time. Other countries coming. I'm at Elise Loehnen on Instagram. My podcast is called Pulling the Thread, and I have a newsletter on Substack that's called Pulling the Thread. So that's where I am. Oh,
so happy for you. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.